All right, now welcoming into the program our good friend in the Mile High City, Nick Kosmider. What's up, Nick?
I'm doing good, Paul. How are you, man?
Doing great. We were able to link up for a wild one in Cincinnati last December, and sadly, I'll say to you the same thing I said to Alec Lewis last week. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This was supposed to be more fun right now. I feel like I have to apologize every time I talk to you guys every single week. I'm sorry that the fun show isn't coming to town, but it'll be a show nonetheless.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not on the hook for the turf. You're not the turf to Joe Burrow's toe. So I don't hold you personally responsible for what's happened, but it is, man. Like that was one of the ones when the schedule came out where you're just like, man, they get right back on the field after that like really epic game they had there in Cincinnati in prime time back in December. Was really looking forward to that one. And now it's kind of like the desperation bowl a little bit for both teams that haven't quite had things go, particularly the team you cover, but haven't had things go quite the way that they expected it to leading up to this game.
No, is a lot has happened for both teams thus far. Let's focus on what's happened with Denver. Do you want to start with the leverage call? I can't get over that. Like you end up kind of stealing an L from a W in Indianapolis. How has the team reacted to? I know last year a big storyline was one score losses, and the Bengals had a very similar experience, and it's kind of followed this year. Is that still a theme that's kind of hanging on to Denver and hanging over their head right now?
It is, as much as they might not want it to be, because Sean Payton, after the Broncos lost another game on a walk-off field goal Sunday in Los Angeles, said, this is this year. Like last year was last year, and that's all well and good. Except that some of the themes that emerged last year when they were 1-6, to your point, in one score games have been a problem again in 2025, namely the Broncos just being unable to capitalize on numerous opportunities to win the game or extend their leads before they ever get to that kind of defining moment of a field goal. But yeah, the leveraging penalty, as far as I could tell, going, we use True Media, have the data that goes back to like 2000. As far as I could tell, this was the first time that like a leverage penalty on a kick with no time left, turn a miss into a winning field goal. Those penalties just don't happen at all very often, like maybe 4 times a year. And generally, they happen on field goals that were made, and you just either you decline it, or in some instances, like you accept it and then go down and score a touchdown. But to have it be, the final play when they were attempting a 60-yard field goal, when Spencer Schrader, the Colts kicker, had never made a field goal of more than 48 yards in his NFL career, and to put on an aggressive block when there's going to be scrutiny from the officials, it was a disaster. And the Broncos have now in back-to-back years lost games on last-second field goal plays you should never lose. They had a 35-yard field goal blocked against the Chiefs, although we saw last week in the league. I guess that's apparently just kind of common now. But and then they had this happen in week 2 there in Indianapolis. So they feel a little bit snake bitten right now. And until they can, there is a hurdle, whether they want to, admit it or not. There's just this inability in close games, particularly against like AFC playoff caliber teams, to get over that hump. They just haven't done it yet.
I don't know if the Bengals are that yet, and so that might be a part of the something that could be an assist for Denver here. But I want to focus on what has been kind of a problem for Cincinnati and as the strength of the Denver Broncos, and that's Denver's pass rush. I mean, it just seems like they're coming from everywhere. 5 different defensive linemen that have at least 40 pass rushes this year and have a win percentage over 14%. That is staggering. Cincinnati has 2 such guys. They would love to have 3 or 4. I mean, the amount of different places that it comes from. What has made Denver's pass rush so good, and how are you seeing it change games right now?
Well, I would kind of, when you go back to last year, they led the league with 63 sacks. It was a franchise record. And then they turned around and brought everybody back. So I think it starts there. They already had the continuity. It's a group that loves playing together, like Zach Allen and John Franklin Myers. Just an excellent duo. And then you have Nick Benito and Jonathan Cooper on the outside. These guys have been playing together now for quite a while. They've built these pass rush games. They know what they're doing. And I would say the other thing that we've seen is a guy like Jonah Ellis, who is going into his second season, only 22 years old, but has been off to a really great start for the Broncos so far. The idea for Denver this year was to have guys like Zach Allen and Nick Benito play just a little bit less so that they were fresh later in games. And that meant, more for Jonah Ellis and Dondre Tillman on the other side. And those guys were good last year, and they've appeared to be even better this year. And then Benito just looks like he's leveling up to where you can say, like, he looks like one of the best pass rushers in the league right now. His get off is incredible, and it's causing all sorts of problems when teams have to kind of stretch themselves in the pocket in order to account resources for him, with what the Broncos can offer up the middle. So I would just say it's kind of like a beautiful symmetry right now for the Broncos. The crazy thing is, by most metrics, they have the best pass rush in the league right now, and yet their defense has been decidedly average through 3 games because there's a lot of other vulnerabilities that are getting exploited right now.
Really curious to see what Benito looks like against Orlando Brown, who's a bigger, heavier guy out there. His speed is not necessarily going to be his game, and he's struggled this year. A guy who had been solid for Cincinnati, and I think they felt like the one thing they could really count on, and through a few games has really been leaky on that side. And now you bring in somebody who is not only elite, but also has an elite skill set that is a particular weakness to what Orlando does. Curious to see how much they help. They're not usually one to give much help to Orlando, but it might be the week that they have to do that. But if that exposes them in other areas, it's just more offensive line problems in Cincinnati. They're very used to it. It's okay. Everyone's very comfortable with it. What are those vulnerabilities you're speaking of, though? What has been holding back the Broncos defense from taking this pass rush to being one of the best overall Ds in the league?
Yeah, I wrote about this. It'll be up at The Athletic tomorrow. But their inability to cover running backs out of the backfield has been startling. They're giving up the most yards per target to running backs in the league. They're giving up the highest explosive pass rate when running backs are targeted in the league. And this was after they ranked 28th last season in EPA per play against running backs in the pass game. Part of it is they were supposed to have Dre Greenlaw. You're no stranger there to things that you were supposed to have in place that aren't right now. One of those for the Broncos, because this was an issue last year, they went out and they signed Dre Greenlaw, believing that after that Achilles tear in the Super Bowl that he had been working his way back and was going to be ready to start the season. He suffered a quad injury shortly after signing with the Broncos that has kind of plagued him throughout the summer and now into the season. They did not put him on IR to start the year, but then before their week 3 game against the Chargers, they ended up putting him there. A sign that there's been some setbacks in terms of his recovery. So they don't have kind of the athletic talent at that spot right now to kind of wash away some of the mistakes if they're not lined up perfectly. And too many times this year they've had dropped coverages. Omarion Hampton had a huge gain for the Chargers on their game-tying drive late in the fourth quarter when he was just completely unchecked out of the backfield. Jonathan Taylor in week 2, a 43-yard completion that was just a simple flat. Nobody got out to him. Even in week 1, Tony Pollard, Cam Ward's very first pass play was on a 3rd and long. They all just kind of dive into Ward, and here's Tony Pollard sitting out here wide open for a 29-yard gain. You don't put it all on that. Obviously, that's just kind of one element, but it really has been damaging. They've given up more explosive plays this year than they did a year ago. And when you look at it, it really is there. A lot of penalties defensively. And some of that is surprising for a team that, like I said, returned so many of their core pieces from a unit that was very good last year. The talent is kind of undeniable. They have really good personnel defensively. And part of this is, you say, some of the new pieces that they do have, perhaps still figuring some of this out because they do have the talent. But until they can stop just having these dropped coverages that give free explosive plays, they're going to struggle to put opponents away. And that's been the case. Everybody's looked at the offense because they haven't finished. Well, the defense had 2 chances to hold the Colts in the fourth quarter in week 2. They had 2 chances to essentially win the game against Justin Herbert in week 3. And, couldn't come up with those stops because, again, they're kind of getting exposed in that way.
I'm still kind of in awe watching the replay of Justin Herbert's touchdown
Oh
pass
man.
to Keenan Allen. Unbelievable stuff. I mean, from we I feel like with Burrow, it's like that sometimes where every game you feel like you see something, but when you see something like that, you're like, man, we may not see anything like that all year. Just an unbelievable play by Herbert, who's been having a great year. But Knicks, we saw him obviously back in December, some good, some bad. Obviously, a very solid rookie year, considering all things considered. Where has been the development in his game, maybe from where he was at when he was in Cincinnati in December.
Yeah, it's been a little bit uneven to start the year, and I think one thing that was kind of the easy narrative coming out of Sunday's game was that he had three deep pass opportunities that he overthrew. Each one of those plays could have been a touchdown, and he was just a little bit too long. And there's been times where even for like amateur sort of technique observers that he has, kind of rushed himself in the pocket, tends to drift forward a little bit. Those are some of like the technique things that have gotten to him into some trouble. But kind of the weirder thing that to me is that they haven't been super efficient, like lining up in and out of the huddle. During training camp, that was one of the early things that Sean Payton said was he already felt like that was developing to the point where Nix was able to kind of hit teammates with a quick piece of advice here or there, or hey, don't forget to get into this alignment. Just little things like that that could help accentuate what they were doing on offense. And instead, they've had a lot of formational penalties. They've had to burn some timeouts, just kind of things that make it clear that they're not quite fully in sync yet, and that's kind of led to some of the issues. They've done some things well. J.K. Dobbins has given them like kind of a dynamic element in the run game that they haven't had since Sean Payton got there. And even R.J. Harvey, though he hasn't had a lot of carries to this point, had a 50-yard run in week one. They've been more dynamic in the run game, but they're still even there struggling with consistency, and that's put them in a lot of third and long situations. And that's been a problem for Knicks. They don't have a threat over the middle. I talked about Ingram not being in place. I'm sorry, Greenlaw not being in place defensively. It's the same thing with Evan Ingram, who missed last week's game with a back injury and had only 4 catches through the first 2 weeks. We would have expected a bigger impact from him at this point. So there's just a couple things that they just haven't had fully come together yet. Knicks has made some big plays, and I think still has that ability. But I would say that his development is definitely still a work in progress right now.
Bengals defense has been opportunistic with turnovers. I see, Knicks has a few picks, so they're going to be relying. I mean, where the Bengals are at with Jake Browning, it's a game like most games are, where they're going to have to find turnovers in there. So if Bo Nix can play clean, I think you certainly like their chances. And by the way, as an RJ Harvey fantasy owner, a sleeper pick guy, frustrated with the lack of touches for RJ Harvey. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it was
Congratulations
wild.
to J.K. Dobbins.
I thought for sure. I think I said on our podcast after the week one game in which he only had 6 carries and ended up with 60 something yards. I said, I think we'll look back on that and that'll be like probably the lowest carry total we see for RJ Harvey for a long time. And then he's had fewer in each of the last 2 games. They tried to get him going early in week 3. He had the first 2 touches of the game. I think picked up a total of 7 yards on those 2 plays. But then they just never really got back to him. So that's been another thing. Just they haven't quite found that rotation yet to get him a little bit more involved.
Well, technically this is a 2-1 team versus a 1-2 team, but Vegas odds and eyeballs tell a very different story, where the Bengals will need to do a lot to go into Denver and get a win. But you know what? When these two teams get together, I'm just here. It's going to be like one big mutton busting is what I'm thinking. I don't know what the halftime show is. I hope
I
I can
hope
get
so.
mutton busting again. I mean, truly one of the craziest moments of my life was being there in 2015 and seeing mutton busting for the first time. The kids literally being tossed into the air. It
Yeah.
felt very irresponsible. So
Yeah.
I just would like to see it again to know that it's still
Yeah.
happens.
Who doesn't like kids getting ragdolled around by wild animal? Yeah,
Incredible
it's
stuff.
fantastic.
Well, either way, I'm looking forward to getting to Denver, one of my favorite cities, and so it'll be a good weekend, and should be a fun game of Monday Night Football. I don't know if it will equal what we got to witness in December, but we'll try. We'll give it
Yeah.
our best. Awesome.
You
Thanks,
know,
Nick. Appreciate it,
it's
man.
always when you least expect it. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
absolutely, absolutely. See you, Nick.
Take care.